Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Results Based Financing for Modern Energy Cooking Solutions, an effective driver for innovation and scale. My name is Carlos Tichinyako. I'm a research associate on the Modern Energy Cooking Services program here at Loughborough University. Before we proceed, I would like to share a few housekeeping guidelines. Johnny, could you? Thank you. So today's session is being recorded, and the recordings will be made available on the MECS website. May I also please ask all participants to mute their microphones, with the exception of the speakers. If you have a question or would like to raise a point, please feel free to drop it in the chat box, and we will gladly pass it on. Let me quickly take you through the agenda for today. We have Peter Weston of Energy for Impact, who will provide a few introductory remarks, after which we will invite the MECS team, so Susan and Malcolm, to provide a snapshot of the MECS E4I report on RBF for modern energy cooking solutions, which we are happy to announce will be launched by the end of this month. After the presentation, we will take questions specifically on the presentation from the MECS team. This will be followed by the panel discussion and finally some Q&As where panelists will take questions from the audience. I wish you all fruitful deliberations. I will now hand over to Peter, who will share a few words and introduce us to our esteemed moderator and panelists for today's session. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Welcome everybody to this MECS webinar on RBF for clean cooking. My name is Peter Weston. I'm the Director of Programs at Energy for Impact. We're a non-profit focused on alleviating poverty in sub-Saharan Africa through access to energy, and we do a lot of work in clean cooking. We've been working with MECS since March last year. We're basically working with them in two areas. The first area is focusing on mapping the funding landscape for clean cooking. And the second area, which we started earlier this year, is where they're in-country partner in Rwanda. And as Carlos mentioned, this webinar has been organised in the lead up to the publication of a new joint report by MECS and E4I on RBF. The RBF report is the fourth report in a series of reports that we are producing with MECS. The first three have already been published. One was on crowdfunding, another one was on appliance financing, and yesterday we publicised a report on clean cooking concessions for displacement settings. So please have a look on either the MECS or E4I websites to find out more about these exciting reports. I feel this particular webinar is very, very timely. Over the last 10 years, donors have increasingly been looking at using RBF as a tool for scaling up clean cooking. The results have been mixed, but there's still a lot of work going on in the area. The early programs tended to focus on improved biomass stoves, but the more recent ones have been looking at modern energy cooking technologies. Last year, for example, Global Leap ran the first RBF targeted at a single clean cooking technology for electric pressure cookers in Kenya. That was a pilot, and hopefully will set allow for further RBFs focusing on single technologies related to modern energy cooking. Last year also saw the launch of the first or the largest clean cooking RBF. There's a 20 million clean cooking fund in Rwanda, which is being implemented by the government there with funding from ESMAP, and that includes a 7 million RBF component for clean cooking. And this is just a few examples. There are lots of clean cooking RBFs being implemented or planned in many other African countries, sometimes on a standalone basis, and sometimes as part of broader energy access programs. RBF programs are designed to increase the uptake of clean cooking, particularly for new or improved technologies in challenging or early stage markets, but they are not easy to implement. I think many of you will be familiar with the challenges in the clean cooking sector. The market is very nascent. There's a lack of proven business models. There are affordability issues. There's limited consumer awareness of some of the new technologies. Finance can be an issue, and data is also an issue. And all of these issues impact on RBF. But designing an RBF for clean cooking is probably even more complicated than that for other energy access sectors like solar home systems. Why do I say that? Well, the upfront cost of most stoves is relatively low to their fuel and life cycle costs. And the other challenge is the fact that the market lacks homogeneity. There's a large number of different clean cooking fuels and technologies out there, each with their own set of business models. So I think this particular event is happening at the right time, and I'm super excited to kind of report. We will report the findings of our RBF report that will be published in a few weeks, and I'm super excited to hear the panel discussion later on, which includes practitioners from all sides. You know, it includes representatives from companies, implementers, and also kind of M&E specialists. So I think that's enough from me. I will hand over to Suzanne to go through the findings of our report.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. So while Peter has outlined a few of the challenges of the clean cooking sector, as well as designing an RBF in the sector, I would like to present some of the findings of our joint report, which hopefully increase your interest in reading the whole report once it's coming out. You might have seen already our academic paper in Energies, which has a similar title. If not, it's free access, so we can provide the link later. But please, Joni, start the presentation, that we don't lose time, because we want to focus on the panel discussion, which is the most exciting part, I think, of this webinar. So very briefly, MECS is a 5-year FCDO-funded research to impact program. And we're focused on enhancing access to modern energy cooking, and modern energy is mainly tier 5 and above appliances. Next slide, please. So we're all aware that access to clean cooking globally is a big challenge, and IEA recently estimated again that 2.6 billion people still rely on polluting cooking fuels, which puts the achievement of SDG 7 in serious jeopardy. And nevertheless, it's no point for being gloomy, but looking ahead, how can we change that situation? And how can access to clean cooking being scaled up? And RBF, as Peter mentioned already, has gained increased interest over the last couple of years in the clean cooking sector. And we were asking ourselves, in cooperation with E4I, what are the key success factors, and can RBF function as a tool to scale up clean cooking technologies in certain developing markets? For that, we performed a lot of research over the last year in collaboration with numerous stakeholders, and thank you again for those who are present in this webinar for helping us here to get a clearer picture. And we were covering 5 case studies of very, very different cooking markets in Mozambique, Kenya, and Rwanda. Peter mentioned already the programs that we were looking at. So now what are we taking from this review? Joni, next slide, please. So as Peter mentioned, the RBF is a program where funds are dispersed upon delivery or partially upon delivery. It's comprised of 4 stages: setting the results or agreeing on the results, the implementation process, the verification process by an agency, and the disbursement of funds. So while this means that some of the financial risk will be transferred from the donor to the participant of the program, private company, it can also mean that the funding or the incentive must be a little bit higher, per project or per appliance than full upfront grant funding because of that risk that needs to be mitigated at some point. And the donor still bears a risk, a reputational risk, if something goes wrong from this side. So we need a strong program design, robust due diligence during the supplier selection, and a dynamic monitoring during the implementation, which makes the program very, very complex. Next slide, please. So our report will be launched in the next 2 to 3 weeks, but we wanted to make sure to include very recent updates because the market is very, very dynamic. A lot of RBF programs are currently implemented or underway. So there's a lot of movement in this section. That's why the webinar is so important. But we can share some first findings from a very general perspective. They might differ a bit from program to program, but that's what we condensed. So the first one is focusing on the elements of an RBF themselves. And what we found is that in terms of targets, the RBFs we evaluated are purely output-based in terms of targets and not so much impact-based yet, hopefully. That's a big future discussion. How can we increase that side of RBF? In terms of eligibility, we have seen a shift from improved cook stoves, biomass cook stoves, towards higher tier and modern energy technologies. But this is still very early stage and definitely needs a lot of work to be expanded in the markets. With respect to the bidding mechanism, we have also seen a development from fixed incentives of up to 50% per stove to a reverse auction system, which usually advantages bigger companies because they can be more brave in terms of and more aggressive in their bidding process. So it needs to be ensured that smaller companies also have a chance in this process, especially local companies, to create a sustainable market in a certain country. Fourthly, we have seen that tiered incentive structures are becoming increasingly more common to manage regional distribution of stoves, for example, in disadvantaged areas. And finally, the MRV, the monitoring and evaluation process, is critical to an RBF. And we have seen, for example, in the COSAP program in Kenya, that this can be a serious bottleneck for the program because the whole disbursement of funds relies on this process and of a smooth process. We have seen that this is mainly done manually via phone calls, but there's great potential in applying, for example, pay-go systems and integrate them in the RBF to digitalize the whole process a bit more. So I will come to that quickly at the end. Next slide, please. So what are the key success factors for a clean cooking RBF? This is, again, a very condensed version of what we have found and very generalized. The first finding is that RBF is only one instrument and remains only one instrument to accelerate clean cooking uptake or access in developing markets. And there is still a whole range of other instruments that must not be taken out of sight here. And the second one is the consumer is key. That might not be surprising. So in terms of affordability, competitiveness of the fuel, and the awareness, these are key critical success factors for the appliances to be successful in the market, also in the long term. And here is the big question is, how nascent can the market be? And I think we might touch that later in the panel discussion. So it's a bit that chicken or egg. To what extent does RBF require a certain developed market, and to what extent can it support market development? What we also see in terms of consumer awareness is that it helps if RBF programs are flanked by consumer awareness strategies, for example, supported by national ministries of energy, for example, or other market players like utilities. In terms of the supply chain and the infrastructure for modern fuels, we must say that this is as well as an important factor. And again, the question is how developed needs that to be. Of course, there needs to be a certain supply of the fuels if a certain technology is going to be in the focus of an RBF. The policy environment plays a certain role. We have seen in Kenya where VAT exemptions for clean cooking devices were axed and then reintroduced. That created a lot of confusion in the market. So it is important that there is a certain political buy-in in the market to enable companies or to limit these barriers for clean cooking companies. End user financing is still connected with the affordability issue, is a key aspect. We have touched on that, or we will touch on that in our upcoming report, or we have also revealed that in one of our E4I and MECS reports on appliance financing in the clean cooking sector. So that's available on our website, as Peter mentioned already. And finally, we need to understand what the market is, and each cooking market is slightly different in terms of habits, in terms of general status of the market, availability of fuels. So it is important to tailor-made the RBF to a certain extent, but also to generalize it to a certain level to make the implementation smooth and easy. So I think we might also touch on that in the panel discussion. So how specific should an RBF be and how generalized can it be to be more effective and efficient? Next slide, please. So what we have done is we translated these findings into a call to action, and we aim to explore that further with our partners. So this is not a one-stop thing. We're done with RBF, so we hope to continue that process in the light of what's going on in the market right now. So what we say is really understanding the market and adapt the RBF design. So that is a key variable. I already mentioned that. We need to look at financing approaches to support supplier organizations, especially for smaller companies. Participating in an RBF requires significant upfront funding, and access to financing, especially in developing market, is challenging. So the availability of affordable financing, for example, through bridging loans, needs to be considered more fully in current and future RBFs to ensure there's a certain variety of companies participating in these processes. And this is kind of linked to technical assistance, especially to smaller companies. We will evaluate and explain the technical assistance part a bit more extensively in our upcoming financing landscaping report, which is developed together with E4I. So stay tuned. This is coming up. Because what we've seen, especially in Kenya, smaller companies sometimes struggle simply with the application process for results-based financing that can be quite complex. And we also see that technical assistance, for example, can help in areas of budget designing or preparation of documents or the bidding strategy. So it's a very wide field of mechanisms that fall under this category. So as a fourth point, we look into digitalized and outcome-based clean cooking RBF. So Malcolm will say a little bit on carbon financing with this regard. But with the increased development of pay-go applications, especially also in clean cooking appliances, there is a big chance of including that and adapting the RBF accordingly to have more outcome-based results available, also to not only track the disbursement of stoves, for example, but also track the usage, which is a big factor in the future sustainability of these appliances. And finally, which is kind of in relation to number one, is really develop partnerships with a wide range of stakeholders. So sometimes it's only the donor and a national implementing agency convening, but there is a wide range of stakeholders to be involved to really make sure that the market assessment is done comprehensively and that modern energy cooking solutions will be included in the future, as this is the way forward of achieving net zero, SDG 7, and getting away from biomass. So I would like to hand over now to my colleague Malcolm Bricknell, who is touching briefly on the opportunities of carbon financing as an impact side of RBF. Malcolm, very briefly to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Suzanne. I think the point that we would like to make really is that RBF funding can be seen in a slightly broader context than the rather sort of narrow definition that's often applied to it, because really the focus is on channeling donor funding into projects and companies based on developmental impacts. So essentially, from that perspective, it's completely different from other forms of funding that companies would have through, for example, debt, equity, or even conventional grant funding for technical assistance, pilots, or scale-up type activity. And as Suzanne was correctly said, we think there are a lot of synergies between the kind of challenges that the conventional RBF faces and the areas of carbon credits and other forms of impact funding. So obviously, it's very well known that in clean cooking, there are some very clear opportunities to make strong SDG impacts covering a number of different areas that are well known, health being a big one, livelihood improvements, climate action, greenhouse gas emission, and gender, of course. So it's an area that really lends itself to impact funding. And so this is a reason that we wanted to put a strong focus on it and to consider how these synergies can be best exploited. So at the moment, I think it's very well known that carbon financing for clean cooking has really taken off in a very big way. We believe that the prices in the market at the moment in the range of about $6 to $9. This is what we're hearing. And so for appliances that may be able to claim savings of up to say 3 or 4 tons a year, it's very clear that the kind of volume of financing which is potentially available is extremely attractive, and the consequences of that are very profound, because not just if they change the profitability to the companies, then obviously they can affect the prices of the appliances, which in turn will obviously has profound implications for uptake, and the profitability and cash flow to the companies themselves, which again has very big implications for the opportunities for them to scale up and for them to attract funding, and in general to really drive the whole agenda to promote clean cooking. So I think the reasons that we wanted to sort of broaden this kind of approach to RBF is because, as Suzanne was saying, we believe that a lot of the challenges are quite similar. So in particular, what is really required is to be able to measure the impacts very accurately, and also to reduce the costs of doing that, and the inconvenience, I mean costs in terms of the external cost, but also for measuring and reporting by the companies. And in that sense, the move towards smart data measurement and technical progress that we're seeing across a large number of the different technologies, obviously electricity, but also the other modern fuels have the same capability, is creating a whole new opportunity, we believe, to measure these impacts accurately, and to reduce the cost of reporting these. But there is a great deal of work that needs to be done to actually make these systems work in practice, and that's what I think is really very interesting and very exciting for institutions like MECS and others to really get involved and see how we can set up different kind of projects to measure these impacts and really make this whole area work effectively, which I think will be very attractive to the donors if they can see how this can be achieved. So this is obviously true of the carbon credit side. We've been involved, as you might know, in working with Climate Care in introducing a new methodology with gold standard, which we believe is now going to be accepted, which will simplify the approach to certifying carbon credits. Again, there are other work streams that need to come in to build on that, but I think it's going to be a big step forward. And similarly, we've been involved with Shell Foundation with working with Cardano Development on supporting their development impact bond work, which is looking at opportunities to bring impact funding in, particularly for health and gender impacts. So although this has been a pilot, they've done some fantastic work. They've solved a lot of the problems in the process, and they've set the they've set the opportunity up now to scale up this work. So I think I'll just leave it at that for the time being. But as I say, I do think that RBF should be considered in this wider focus, looking at the different kind of synergies involved between these different areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Next slide, please, Jody. I think we have time for a very few questions that can also be posted in the chat. Otherwise, we would catch up at the end if we still have time. Are there any last-minute questions on our presentation? Okay. Farooq has a question. Who would claim the carbon credits? Currently in Kenya, the manufacturers claim them and the implementing companies on the ground don't have an opportunity.
Yes, I mean, I think that's a big question, isn't it? And the answer is it can be done in different ways. I'm not the expert on the programs. I'm slightly one step removed, but we've seen, for example, in the Clean Cooking Fund project in Rwanda, that I believe those credits are being claimed by the program. In other programs, we expect that the credits would be available for the companies, and obviously that is going to affect the structure of the programs and the pricings that go with it. Typically, some of the larger companies have their own programs for claiming carbon credits back, and that tends to be the way that a lot of this gets done. I think if somebody's setting up a new program, then they can obviously look at the opportunities to structure it so that they can claim carbon credits. It can be done in different ways. It can be done by the companies, it can be done by retailers, it can be done by NGOs for their own projects in the case it normally is. So, I think that's the general situation.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Just to let you know, Farooq, we are going to focus more on that topic in the next couple of months. So, and I also assume there will be a webinar coming up on the topic as soon as we have a little bit more substance also with regard to the gold standard certification process for electric cooking. So this is just a little side topic for our RBF topic. Any other questions quickly? Otherwise, I would move on.
So, Suzanne, can I just make one point? I think one of the challenges is that the value that companies will accrue from an RBF is likely to be a lot less than the value that they will accrue from future carbon credits. And that's something that anyone designing an RBF program has to think about.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm looking forward to a future discussion with that. Thank you very much, Peter. So I'm now very excited because now we're talking with the experts, and I would like to hand over to our panel discussion, which is led by Donnie Alexander, who is the Senior Director of Evidence and Impact for the Clean Cooking Alliance at the United Nations Foundation. She's joining us from the US East Coast, so she has a substantial experience in evaluating clean cooking programs, including RBF, and is joined by our 7 panelists who will discuss their experiences with clean cooking RBF programming. So Donnie, over to you.
Thanks, Suzanne. I'm really happy to be here today, or this morning for me. I want to jump right into our panel session because we have 7 great panelists. And so let's start off by going through the list of panelists. I would love for each of you to take a minute to introduce yourself and really kind of discuss why, how you're involved in RBF. So I'll start with Peter George, who happens to be from my organization. So Peter, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Donnie. Good afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure to join the discussion, and thanks to MECS for coordinating it. I'm Peter George. I have a background in energy finance in the US and developing markets. And for the last 5 or 6 years, I've overseen the Clean Cooking Alliance's private sector and investment efforts. During that time, we've been working to leverage donor resources to fund innovation, accelerate the investability of companies in the sector, and work on how concretely to mobilize private capital for its growth. In addition to building out a comprehensive market and enterprise-focused technical assistance program called the Cooking Industry Catalyst, our efforts have also culminated in a collaboration between CCA and a Switzerland-based fund manager called Enabling Capital to develop and hopefully soon launch Spark Plus Africa Fund, which will be the first clean cooking focused investment fund. Spark Plus will be a $50 to $70 million 7-year fund, making $1 to $5 million debt and equity investments in companies operating in Africa, with a team on the ground in Nairobi and perhaps in West Africa as well in the future. The fund will invest across the value chain in companies that design, manufacture, distribute, and finance wood, charcoal, biomass pellets, LPG, biogas, ethanol, as well as electric devices and perhaps other solutions as we move forward. All that said, I'm hardly a specialist in RBF, but I hope to be able to share my insights from the sort of private sector perspective as a prospective investor, having spent the past couple of years trying to raise a fund specialized in this space for which RBF can be a real accelerant. So I'll leave it there, and back to you, Donnie. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. That's very comprehensive and exciting to hear about Spark Plus as well. So next, I'd like to introduce Kat Harrison, who's the director of 60 Decibels, an organization that I think is really leading the way in collecting lean data. So Kat, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks, Donnie. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Kat Harrison. I lead the off-grid energy work at 60 Decibels. We're an impact measurement company focusing on customer insights and delivering benchmarks of impact performance. So we have a team of over 800 researchers across, I think, 50 countries of the globe who day to day are conducting mostly phone interviews with end users of products and services delivered by social enterprises. We partner with organizations like CLASP and SMV to conduct impact verification of RBF programs as well. We've worked with multiple improved cooking companies, listening to their customers' experiences, capturing insights around profile and feedback, and learning about impact and behavior. So for me, I think a critical missing factor in much of the sector's work is hearing end user voices, their opinions, experiences, and desires, and this really enables us to better design and deliver products and services that meet their needs, are used, shared, talked about, and create the most impact. For me, data is most valuable when it's geared towards learning and improving impact rather than reporting and proving impact. So I'm really excited for the discussion today around the role RBFs can play in the sector and what opportunities there are to leverage and focus towards positive impacts on end users.
Thanks, Kat. Next, I'd like to introduce Brooke Kimani, who is a Clean Energy Access Associate at CLASP.
Yeah, thank you so much, Donnie. Hi, everyone. I'm Brooke Kimani, an associate with CLASP. So CLASP, we are an international nonprofit focusing on appliance and energy equipment and quality to mitigate and adapt climate change and expand to clean energy access. And so at CLASP, I support the implementation of clean energy access programs, one of which is the globally results-based financing program. And we have done this for a number of off-grid appliances, including solar water pumps, refrigerators, fans. And so last year on May, we piloted the first result-based financing for e-cooking, focusing on electric pressure cookers, and which we implemented through the Efficiency for Access Coalition with support from NDEV. And so I'm really excited to be talking about our experiences through the implementation of this program. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ruth. All right, next we have Bertha Okoyo, who is a customer experience manager at Kudura Power East Africa. Bertha, it would be great to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Bertha Okoyo. I work for Kudura Power East Africa as the customer experience manager, and with our large base of customers in whatever we supply, so electricity. So we are a mini grid company in Kenya who are serving the underserved with the grid, and therefore we produce and sell electricity to the off-grid areas. We are so much glad that we participated in this program of MECS, and we'll be glad to share most of our concerns later. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Bertha. Next, we have Matthias Olsen, who is the CEO of Emerging Cooking Solutions, one of the clean cooking companies that currently exist in the sector.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having this seminar, which is great. It's a great topic, and we started quite a while ago, almost 10 years ago, with a very strong focus of bringing a fuel switch solution to scale. And we have developed a very highly integrated business now. We work on many levels, and we kind of have to at this point as an early adopter. And so we basically produce pellets from waste biomass. We even source the biomass. And then we have a distribution part, of course, for stoves and pellets. And then we realized we have to do consumer financing. So let's add that to the pie. And we got very involved in mobile money and pay-as-you-go many years ago. And that was a really, really great development, thanks to the off-grid solar sector. And now we are working on two very exciting projects, which are really coming to fruition. One is a new level of biomass gasification technology, which we call the 4th generation technology, which I'm sure you'll hear more about later. But it's also to work very closely with several of the other companies in the advanced biomass subsector, which is to look at how we can use the carbon markets more in a more sane way, basically shorten times from roughly 24 months until credits are issued, until ideally 1 second, and also use data to really create a high, really quality level so that there is absolutely no doubt of its authenticity and so on. And the goal there is really to get a higher price and have it be near instant, and then also to have a really open platform where that can really benefit the whole sector. So, and we work in Zambia and also soon in Mozambique and Malawi.
Great, thanks, Matthias. Now we have Ash Sharma, who is the Senior Director for NEFCO and the head of Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa.
Hi, and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks to the colleagues at MECS for having us here. Just to say a few words really about the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. We are a fund which is working primarily with results-based financing, but we tend to focus currently on the electricity side of the SDG 7. So we work with solar, home systems, and mini grids primarily. We work in 5 countries. We have a total assets under management of around 90 million euros. As I mentioned, we are running a number of these calls for proposals in 5 countries. We have 10 funding lots, and what we're looking to do really is to support enterprises. Very glad to see Matthias there. He's one of the awardees who's been working with the Beyond the Grid Fund for Zambia. And we're looking at opportunities in which we can take forward some of this learning that we've had in terms of administering and scaling results-based financing to the clean cooking space. And together with SIDA, the Swedish government, we are looking to set up a new facility where we can bring some of this experience to bear, particularly in regard of higher tier access, 3, 4, and 5, not including LPG, I'm afraid, but we are looking at other forms of clean energy. So we're very keen to join this discussion, and we're happy to share some of the learning that we've had from the Beyond the Grid Fund for Zambia and the ongoing Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ash. Yeah, that's really exciting. And last but not least, we have Mercy Kamu from SCODE, Kenya. And then after we hear from Mercy, we'll get started with the panel session.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mercy Kamau, and I work with the SCODE. SCODE is an NGO and also a limited company based in Kenya that was started in 1996. And we mainly deal with renewable energy products and technologies that we deliver to households. We've been actively distributing improved cook stoves, solar home systems, and biogas for the last 20 plus years. And we also do a lot of consultancy, community mobilization, and community education in reference to renewable energy technologies. SCODE participated in the EPC RBF program last year through CLASP, yeah, and it was a good experience. And we were first introduced to EPCs and clean cooking, higher cooking through MECS, through the MECS team, and we've done a few projects on clean cooking. Yeah, and we were excited to pilot the EPC RBF project in Nakuru, Kenya. I'm looking forward to learning more and interacting with the panel and the rest of the participants within this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Mercy. That was excellent. Well, I want to take us right over to the panelists. And I think one of the things that I really heard Suzanne talk about is, we're still a long way away from getting to SDG 7. And is RBF something that can really help us accelerate the progress? And I think that's one of the questions we were thinking and looking at about answering here today. And so I wanted to start with Peter George. Peter, is the inclusion of carbon financing and impact funding in RBF a realistic scenario for the near future? And what is needed to make it happen? I think these are really important questions for us to actually get to where we need to go here.
Sure, jumping right in. That's a tricky one. That's a big question. No, I think obviously, to the extent that RBF is paying for impacts ex post, you need someone to take, and Suzanne talked about this in the introductory slides, you need someone to take upfront financial risk. I think that's both realistic and achievable. We certainly have seen it over the last, number of years with the early days of the carbon markets. If somebody was willing to purchase carbon credits, there were certainly the carbon cowboys out there ready to invest up front to generate those credits, right? And it was an early stage market and it's evolved. But clearly, if the incentives are arranged properly, there will be capital willing to invest up front in order to generate that RBF revenue stream or the carbon credits or whatever the case may be. I think, in order for it to happen, it's critical that the mechanisms or the carbon markets or whatever the sort of channel is for the RBF funding, they need to be set up in such a way that investor concerns and requirements are taken into account. Because obviously, if the investment doesn't come, you have an RBF contract or you have an ERPA, an emissions purchase agreement that's really just a piece of paper. It doesn't generate anything. It doesn't produce impact. You need somebody to invest. So what specifically is needed? I think that's what you're getting at, Donnie. And of course, it's complicated. You know, RBF needs to target the technologies and the business models in which investors are interested. You know, there must be alignment in terms of geography. The sizing of the support has to be adequate. So the sizing of the RBF has to be sufficient to encourage the investment. The duration of the contract needs to be sufficient, you know, to allow the investor to recoup its investment. You know, I think in terms of the question around carbon, you know, obviously carbon is one of the more sort of measurable results that can be paid for. So, you know, you get into health, you get into some of these other impact areas, and it becomes even more challenging. But I think that the big game changer, both on carbon and other impacts, and I think Matthias, you were alluding to this, is, you know, how do you create a system that is very verifiable and does not have such a big delay? And I'm excited to hear what, Matthias, you're sort of planning on that front. But, you know, to the extent that you can reduce costs, monitoring and verification costs, you have, you know, IoT-enabled devices like EPCs or LPG meters, or you're selling fuel like pellets. You know, I think that this is a big step change from in the past, where, you know, carbon finance, other sorts of RBF was more difficult to achieve at scale because, you know, you were relying on sort of surveys being done by carbon credit auditors. There are questions around that. And so I think we're headed in the right direction with the evolution of technology and business models. So maybe I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think that's spot on. And one of the things that I've seen and we're seeing is this evolution of technology and the ability to understand usage, you know, right away. And what does that look like is really leapfrogging us ahead, and hopefully will take us in the right direction. But I think this is just a really nice dovetail into Kat, and really talking about efficacy versus complexity, and what data is required for seamless verification process, what is needed to understand consumer uptake and adoption, and how do we best collect that. And I think you know, the work that 60 Decibels has done over the last few years has really helped us to understand this. So it'd be great to hear from your point of view, you know, what is kind of the right mix there, and how do we go about it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's true. Impact verification can be pretty costly and time-consuming, but I don't think it has to be. And I think what's important is, often, particularly in nascent markets, it's a real opportunity for particularly valuable, you know, sector and stakeholders to combine verification with learning. So these impact insights, these feedback from consumers and customers, almost a bit of a technical assistance sweetener to participating companies. But in terms of kind of efficacy, complexity in the partnerships, we have, you know, being the impact verification partner or delivering that work, we've got it down to a pretty fine art. And I think I hope that's not very taxing for each company. You know, at simplest level, to verify sale, we need for each product sold, the date it was sold, to check it's within the window of the RBF, who it was sold to and their phone number, so we can randomly call a sample of customers and verify that, you know, they purchased that product. What product was sold, of course, because often RBFs are focusing on specific products. And honestly, that's about it. You don't need to phone 100% of all customers and all sales. If you're doing a random sample, a random selection, then you should have a representative view. And so I think using those verification calls to understand uptake and adoption, you know, talking to customers a few months after purchase, or even longer, is great, is really the only way you can understand what's going on. I think smart data, where available, can absolutely be used to determine usage and brings all sorts of insights and information on usage and behavior. But what this kind of passive data always lacks is any insights on the why behind customer usage, the impact customers see and value the most, and broader behaviors such as stove stacking. So I often think of this kind of like smart data as the what's happening, but doesn't tell you anything about the why that is happening. And particularly in newer sectors where we're still trying to understand customer behavior and preferences and needs, that's really critical for growth. in what was quite interesting in the interviews with electric pressure cooker customers for CLASP's RBF, we're able to ask really interesting questions around ownership and usage of stoves in the household, so pre and post purchase of the EPC, fuels used, what affects decisions around which type of stove to use in terms of types of meal, time, convenience, access to or cost of fuel, who does the cooking in the home and more. And that's often used by companies then for really determining sort of marketing and sales pitches, customer acquisition and sort of focused sales pitches, as well as really the design and setup of the cook stoves, and hopefully making sure they're really meeting those household needs.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. And actually, you we're heading into what I was actually going to ask Ruth, really about the lessons learned from consumer adoption from the Kenya EPC. And how can this help us shape other RBFs and going forward? So I think there's some lessons learned there that would be really nice to hear from you, Ruth. And then also, how can we measure longer term consumer uptake? And then how can that, can that be become a KPI in future RBFs? So really, what have we learned from this Kenya electric pressure cooker RBF, and how do we take that forward?
Yeah, so great question. So I think one of the lessons that we have learned, and actually looking at just the recently report we released on the uses and impacts of electric pressure cookers, is that of the 400 customers that were interviewed, a lot of them, almost 90% of them, these were like first-time users, and generally the satisfaction rate among them was really high, which was very, it's very indicative of like already there's that willingness and openness among the consumers to try and test new technologies, right? Like that they've not really used before. So I think that is sort of like indicative in terms of like looking at RBF programs. When it's sort of like, yeah, it's indicative of that, like there's that potential, or there's that opportunity for more RBF programs to sort of like scale that market. And then also looking at also like sort of like the feedback that we are getting from the consumers, because like they had feedback around what were the areas around the challenges they were expecting. And so some of these issues could be related about like the product quality, or related about like the service that they were getting. And so a lot of this feedback can also be looked back into when designing RBF programs, to make sure that when you're designing the programs and setting up the eligibility and the structure around that these concerns are sort of like taken into consideration. And so so I think and also this feedback that we get from customers, I think Susan mentioned earlier that RBF in itself, it's just like a single instrument. And so there needs to be also like other intervention areas that are needed to sort of like scale the markets for nascent technologies. And so if feedback from customers, we are seeing there's a need for more like consumer awareness and things like that. So these feedbacks will like helps indicate where other interventions can be implemented to support what the RBF is currently doing. And so in terms of how we measure longer term consumer uptake, I think that would imply that we also sort of like, I think we would need also longer term monitoring of the usage and impact of appliances of the long-term monitoring of the usage and the impact that the appliances are having on consumers. And so I think this would have implications in terms of like, of course, it would mean like maybe additional funding, longer-term RBFs, and also in terms of how the RBF is structured. And so I think maybe possibly one of the scenarios that I see maybe in the future where we have for longer term programs, you know, same as like the carbon credits where payments are made like on an yearly basis based on emissions avoided. You could have like payments made to companies based on like service delivery of products that have been working over the period. So I think, yeah, those are my thoughts around that.
Thanks, Ruth. And I think you really really highlighted the importance of actually what Kat was saying is the smart data gives us the what, but really those going back to the consumers gives us the why, and that helps us focus on how we design programs going forward. And that's really an important factor that is needed for us to design smart RBF programs, along with, as you say, consumer awareness and a policy environment that is supportive. It's not just the instrument itself. And then when we talk about long-term consumer uptake, that's maybe where we do look at using that smart data to actually see if they're using it over time. So I think that's all really, really helpful. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Bertha, and this is a little bit different, but I think it's important to understand for your business what elements of RBF programs are most significant. Is it the grant itself, or other components such as the upfront financing or the TA? And when, how does this, how do you look at the RBF programs and what really is most important for your business?
Thank you very much. So I think one, I must say that the grant itself was quite important, because this made us we were able to purchase the equipment with it. Looking at Kudura being a startup, and so this was really an important fact that we got the grant upfront and the RBF program, and we were able to purchase these particular equipment. The other sector that is really quite important will be on the technical assistance on team, because we realized, yes, we are dealing with the end user who are the consumers, but then how do we make them aware? Should we continue having these trainings on them? How best do this is a new product in the market that we were rolling out to them, and it took a long time for us to have them sensitized, because this was really a new product. So I think, again, having a technical assistant would really boost this. The issue on reliability for long term, and again, we're looking at result-based financing is great, but then how do we ensure that customers, the issue of long-term usability is managed? Is it just disposing of these the EPCs, because we tried out with the EPCs, or how do we measure that this goes on for a long time? So as much as it is not affordable for them, which was made affordable because of the grant, and then how do we look at purchase of token, because that is what makes it reliable? You have this EPC, but are you able to use it on a daily basis? How many hours are you using it in a day? Will you be able to use it for 6 months, or are you using it for 2 days or 3 days in a week? So I think those are also issues around, the grant that are really important to be considered. The other issue would be, is it possible to have probably a pilot stage for a new product, especially the EPC that was really new in the market? And the time frame that it takes first for sensitization and creating awareness of this particular product before even the consumers themselves engage and are able to pick it up. So I think if we look at all those grants, then we would move forward with that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think what I'm hearing is it's everything. You have to really think about this as a package, and that grant is obviously very important to be able to, especially for startups, to be able to move things. But the TA and the long-term monitoring and all of that is also essential. Now I'd like to turn it over to Matthias, and I think there's a couple of things, having run a clean cooking company for many years now, and thinking about results, and when we look at climate impacts or health impacts, we have to look at the displacement of other fuels and technologies, right? It's not just adding a new technology, and that's where stacking comes in. And is there a way or that RBF can help address fuel stacking, or at least understand it better? And then I think on to that, do you see that, from your point of view as a company, is carbon financing part of the RBF picture for clean cooking solutions and modern energy technologies going forward? So I think those are the things that I'm really interested in hearing from a company's perspective.
Well, thanks a lot, Donnie, and I think those are two really good questions. And I think we are in a very nascent, stage, really. I mean, 10 years ago, the general consent was that we need more efficient stoves, and that has now turned into we need to switch fuel. And I think that's a very important development. But we're still focused on the devices and not so much on the actual maybe usage or service. And I would hope that in the future we are not so focused on the device or even technology. We're focused on renewable, clean, high level cooking solutions, and there will probably be a lot of blending. Like different technologies have different advantages. EPCs are fantastic for certain cooking tasks, but I don't buy the idea that they would cook any kind of food. Biomass is very powerful. But it's also hard to get the same range as other cooking solutions and so on. So I think a blend, but how do you account for that? But it's almost amusing to me that many of us, including myself, often think of like one stove is access to cooking. And I mean, I think 2 plates is like almost a minimum and that is, I think we should just also do more research on that, like what would the difference be in terms of displacing the old fuel for 1 versus 2, and also maybe different solutions. There are some really potentially really good combinations, like ethanol is a very easy to turn down, it's very easy to turn on, and so on. Some are very good for quick cooking tasks, other for long, more heavy duty cooking tasks and so on. So I think there's a lot of discovery work to be done in that, and how you account for it, of course, because if you get paid an RBF for a device, what if you sell 2 devices and that becomes a more complete displacement? These are details, but I think how to account for it is it's not my problem so much, but I think that's something to look at. And then the role of carbon, I mean, I think first of all, data and carbon kind of go together for me, and I really see a very exciting point in the sector now, because the switch to the acknowledgement of the need for clean fuel, that's kind of taken place in the past few years. There was also a time of real uncertainty, I think 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of donor fatigue and so on. But now I know of several companies, including our own, which either have access to or are in the development stages of stoves which send data back to a server, either directly or through a mobile phone. And it seems that this idea is popping up in many places, and that means that it's probably a good idea if many people have the same idea. So we have, for example, we've run a pilot now with the NCF project. We have about 1,000 stoves connected to internet through a small 2D chip. It's about a $10 extra cost at scale, and that's something that I think most manufacturers could take, because the value of that is massive. And we're getting a lot of data coming in now for many months, and frankly, we haven't really analyzed it, but it points to me the future, because as also 60 Decibel talked about, it's very valuable to have the passive data, but we also need the smart data. But the combination, I think, is really good, because when you, let's say, when a call center talks to a customer, if they have the passive data in front of them, it gives another picture of the customer, like why they have or haven't used the stove and so on, and of course for research and everything. But how this all links to carbon, I think, is because the carbon markets have woken up. The world is waking up to the climate change is real, which took a long time. I think 20 years too late, but I think we are at that point. And the carbon prices are increasing. EU ETS is, I think, 55 euros or 57 euros. It's doubled. And it's about 10 times more than a typical cook stove. So why do we get so much less? Probably some over issuance because it's basically self-reported, randomly sampled data. Of course, it's not high quality enough. So we need to move into programs where we can have data with absolute total integrity. And I think the gold standard methodology that was mentioned, I think is a good step. It doesn't go all the way. I think it basically measures for biomass, it measures the fuel sale, which is probably the highest confidence factor booster. But you also need to verify that the stove was running. That is like the crown of everything, I think. And so, as I mentioned, there is some really positive developments. You know, we're working with several companies to try to create a standard on this. We're also working with blockchain companies to try to create a public ledger, because right now there are three main legacy ledgers: the CDM, Gold Standard, and Vera. And it doesn't really matter where the ledger is, but a public immutable ledger to me is even taking it a step further. So just to finalize and paint my vision how it would look like a few years from now, and it's not rocket science, I really think this will happen. A stove is sold or distributed, whatever it is. The user is verified, and it's verified that the user bought fuel, turning on the stove, turning off the stove again, and immediately money is distributed through smart contracts to the manufacturer, distributor, the end user, maybe through loyalty points to the end user so they can pick up more fuel, or maybe their device is paid off through the carbon finance. There could also be connected, the carbon revenue could also be collateralized, because basically this person is potentially generating, because the impact belongs to the user is generating the impact. And the user potentially generates $100, even $200 a year in carbon impact, and we haven't even touched on gender and health impact, which the DIB is working on. So, but this has to be managed carefully, because we don't want perverse incentives and loopholes and things like that, because that would be detrimental to the growth of this. So we have to take very measured steps. But since the carbon markets, I believe very much, are coming, getting more mature, I really see that this could be like a game changer for clean cooking, because all of you who work with finance, you are very catalytic to the sector, but the amount there is not what's going to take the sector to scale. And for fuel switch solutions, which is becoming the norm now, we have two revenue streams. One is for the device, which is normally zero or small margins, and the other one is the fuel, which is normally higher margins. But RBF and of course grant is a kind of temporary the carbon or the impact revenue could play a really significant role in this. So I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you bring up several really salient points. And one is, you know, the way that we've done it historically has, you know, we've lost confidence in the market. Too many credits have been sold, and we need to bring confidence back into this space and real verification and monitoring that doesn't have too high of transaction costs. And all of that is kind of the nut that needs to be cracked, I think, to really move us to your vision. And I think that's really important. So really helpful there. And I think all very, very important points. We have two panelists left that I want to get to before we open up to broader questions. I see that questions are coming in. They then disappear for me. So I'm probably going to have everybody repeat their questions when we get done with this piece, because I do want to get to the audience, except for some reason on my computer there's no questions after they come up very briefly. So I want everybody to remember the questions that they've been putting in the chat, because I'll ask you for those. Next, I'd like to move to Mercy Kamu from SCODE. And this is, you know, with the Kenya Global Leap EPC, I think that the EPC facilitated the entry of SCODE into that market. And what are the prospects and relevance of this business segment for your company? And another question that I had, and I'm not 100% familiar with this, but it seemed like the EPC, the RPF did not entail TA. And was this a challenge for your company? So it'd be really good to hear a little bit, just some details on this, and understand, would it have been helpful to receive TA, or was what the RBF itself, sufficient? So Mercy, if you could kind of answer those, that would be great to hear about how this worked out for SCODE.
Hi again, everybody. Thank you, Donnie. So, yes, you are right that the RBF did mark the entrance of SCODE into the EPC market. We've mainly been dealing with improved biomass cookstoves, and this was a step towards distributing cleaner cooking solutions to our clients, to our customers. What it did is that it reduced the risk for us. It made us want to invest in clean cooking technology, because then the RBF meant that the risk was a bit reduced, and we were able to then move. It gave us the capital to be able to move up and down and create awareness as bertha. I think our experience was almost the same as bertha's, because then we had to do a lot of sensitization and creating awareness. And yeah, so the RBF was extremely important in that. And in terms of the TA, the technical assistance, yes, it would have been very helpful to have that as a component, because going in, then it meant it's a new technology. We needed to understand the technology itself. And we also didn't have much in terms of linkages with suppliers. And for us, that's the next step. We are still working on that to get suppliers that will be steady and suppliers with the EPC, and also modify it to what the customers need, because then it's what we are getting is an international product, and it's not very specific to the Kenyan market. And you go in there and everyone is telling you, wish it had this, wish it had that. And so it would be nice to work with a manufacturer or supplier who will be willing to modify and adjust it to our market, to the market. Yeah. So I don't know if I've missed something. I can add something. Yeah.
No, that's helpful, and I think it's hearing again that we need to design these RBF facilities very, to be smart and to provide the, not just the grant funding, but also the TA and support that is needed for programs to be effective. I think our last for this round, the last panelist is Ash Sharma, and Ash, you have so much experience with the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, and for off-grid energy space, and can you talk about the lessons learned from those rounds in the off-grid energy space, and how do we incorporate them, or what is important for the future of clean cooking RBFs? I think that's really, how do we go forward, and what have you learned from the off-grid energy space?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think, yes, we have learned quite a lot, and I'm very grateful also for the paper that was written. I think that's a very good paper from MECS. I think you captured quite a few of the issues, but certainly from our perspective in administering funds, of course, we want to work with the private sector. We don't want to be prescriptive. We want to make sure that we enable companies to determine their own business models, their own distribution strategies. We want to enable and enhance some of the market developments that have been talked about in this seminar. So we want to promote consumer finance. We want to promote PAYGO. We want them to help them reach the target beneficiaries, and we want to do this in a way which recognizes the project economics that we're that we're looking at. We're looking at particularly with higher tier, bearing in mind we're looking at the possibility of working with tier 4, 5 programs, so higher tier, higher cost, and therefore greater impacts on affordability. And it also means that maybe we can't work as much as we would like to in the rural areas. We'll have to look at urban areas where the affordability is higher. But I think there's a number of things. I guess I would say, we want to continue to promote innovative business models. We totally recognize, and I think it was Suzanne who mentioned earlier on, the chief difference here really is that so much of this upfront cost is that you have with on the electricity side of SDG7, you don't have here. You have a greater cost, for example, with the biofuel, biopellets, etc., in terms of the fuel. So I think there's a number of ways we can sort of enhance what we've learned in the electricity space. So we can first of all continue with what's good and what works. So it was mentioned about the support. I think there's a need for technical support both to the enterprises, the clean cooking service providers, but also the institutions, and that's worked really well in the BGFZ, for example, with the off-grid task force, helping overcome some of the investment barriers, institutional barriers, helping people get through customs issues, all these. So we keep ahead with those good things that work, but we also need to add a number of other, I guess, cooking specific items, and I think some of these have been mentioned today. So people have talked about the carbon financing. I think there are some barriers to carbon financing. Some of the transaction costs are high. I think, Matthias, you mentioned $10. Perhaps that's something we can cover cover that incremental cost, take that burden off the suppliers. We can also look at advancing some of these costs going forward, so that perhaps on a reimbursable basis. If you're looking at the carbon revenues that Matthias is talking about here, we potentially get to the stage where companies are making a hell of a lot of money. So we also need to look at ways in which we can make this a sustainable instrument, so we can take things forward in that way. So I think there's a number of issues around that. We're looking very much at the stove use monitoring, the possible incentives that can be provided to companies to have those sort of costs. What can we do to provide incentives for consumer financing? This is very common. PAYGO is very common, of course, in the electricity space, but there aren't many companies which have really gone down that road with clean cooking. So again, there are incremental costs there. So the idea here really is to look at how we could cover some of these incremental costs. But ultimately, we don't want to interfere with the market. We want to support the market. We want people to come forward with their business plans and look at ways in which we can support those and not distort the market. And that's why we believe very much in the reverse auction approach. We don't know the project economics as well as the service providers, so we need to sort of rely on them. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there. I mean, we're just at the stage, really, I guess, of trying to develop this, and we're all ears, and they're very keen to learn also from colleagues.
No, that's all very helpful, and I think. Oops. Do you guys hear feedback? Maybe if you mute yourself, Ash, that might help. I think one of the things is, designing something that doesn't interfere or distort the market is really, really important. And that's one of the things that really came out from what we need to design something smart that reduces the transaction costs for the suppliers and programs. Incorporating stove use monitoring, I think, is really will be the future. But again, we have to think about how do we design these to not interfere with the market. And I think that's one of the big questions for sure. I'm going to ask one final question to all of the panelists, and I think anybody who wants to jump in should jump in, and then I was sent the questions from the audience, so I will then get to those. And I think this is a question that we all grapple with, and it kind of varies for carbon financing versus RBF because there are different outcomes that we're looking at. But, is it the chicken or the egg? What level of market nascency is suitable for clean cooking RBF, right? We don't want to be so nascent that, we're distorting the market but when we get to the higher tiers, is it even needed? And we really need to think about that. And under what circumstance is a program suitable to pave the way for the adoption of new clean cooking technologies? And so really, this is about, what level of market nascency is suitable? Where do we want to be designing these RBF programs? Is it in urban, is it in urban areas? It was kind of awkward. Where there is ability to pay already, or do we want to reach places where there is no ability to play, and this might actually bring technologies to that market that would never otherwise be there? So I would love to hear from the panelists on this, what your thoughts are. And yeah, maybe, I know Peter, you definitely have thoughts, but I would love to hear from other people as well, what you think about this question. Matthias or Peter?
I'm thinking maybe mid-stage, because also, like was mentioned in the beginning, we must not forget about the earlier stage companies, because that's where the growth, distribution is key to reaching SDG 7, and we need so many more distribution companies. And right now, it's actually not very attractive to be a distribution company. It's, I love my job, but to be honest, there's not that many new companies coming up, and it should be much more attractive, and we need a pool of young companies. But RBF is probably not the best instrument, and donors have to become less risk averse. Think Silicon Valley. I believe in you. Here's the money. We believe you will do something with it. That kind of attitude, and then accept failures, because that's how technology develops. That's how you get a percentage of companies really make it big, but you need all those other trials. So I think kind of mid-stage, because also, the RBF, if part of the RBF money can come as an advance or something, it's so much about cash flow. At least, for a company like us, kind of mid-level, if you have a lot of, financing and reserves, you can handle. A container with stoves typically cost, between $100,000 and $250,000. It will take you time to sell it, and then you sell it on credit terms. So even if the RBF comes in at, let's say, half of the cost of the stove, it's still not a cash flow positive for quite a while. So I certainly think RBF has a role, but we must not forget about the earlier stage also. But that's probably a different instrument.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead, Peter. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'll jump in just quickly on this. I think from the perspective of most investors, the whole market is nascent, right? Whether it's whatever technology it may be, whether it's urban, rural, whichever country, whether it's in Kenya or it's in a country in West Africa, the majority of investors would look at, clean cooking business models and technologies and say, this is an early stage sector, these business models are still being proven. And so RBF as an ancillary revenue stream is really beneficial, regardless of what the specifics may be. I think obviously where you're going to serve customers where the unit economics are more challenging, rural customers, that's where you need higher amounts of RBF. That's where you need longer tenors of those sorts of contracts. So it's a question of kind of amount rather than is RBF just needed for sort of less mature, more nascent sectors. I think, I'll leave it there. Yeah.
No, I think that's right. And I think think that's it's about how you design it, and more importantly than what the market is, it's how you design it to fit the market itself, and I think that's important. I want to jump to the audience, a couple of questions. We only have 5 minutes left, so I want to just take a couple of questions here, and one came in, and I think it's really actually a very good question. It's, we've heard about data and its uses, many of the uses to which very detailed consumer data will be highly beneficial to consumers. But is there another side to this? Some of the largest and most powerful companies in the world have achieved a very dominant position through monetizing data. And given the very patchy, and if we're being very honest, fairly weak consumer protection in sub-Saharan Africa, does this cause problems? Is this something we need to think about? And does the panel, what does the panelists think about this? And do we see, any potential solution to this, using people's data? And so just wondering if anybody has any thoughts on this.
Well, I can jump in.
Maybe it would be good to hear from Kat as well. But yeah, Matthias, please jump in as you're collecting consumer data or user data in your current program.
Yeah, and of course, some data is very sensitive, like phone numbers and names and things like that, and it can be depersonalized, and and also, for example, location, can be like within a certain area rather than the exact location. So the really sensitive is stored in a different way, and I'm in no ways an expert in this area, and of course there need to be solid data policies and everything. But the vision I really think of is that there is an open data model of depersonalized data where the location is also tweaked a little bit to protect the customer, and that should be available to universities and researchers, and because that's also how we can really understand, coupled with like what 60 decibel is doing, for example, it could really, if you had access, we're getting about 20,000 lines of data every day coming in from the stoves. And honestly, I don't quite know what to do with it. It's like we're working on analyzing it more. And every time someone cooks, there's a lot of data on fan speed and soon also temperature reading, and things like that. And I'm sure it could be very useful. And if we all could depersonalize it and it could be used, I think it could move the sector forward.
Yeah, Kat, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Matthias. I think probably I have a slightly different perspective. At 60 decibels, we don't have end users as customers, like our partners or our Matthias, NEFCO, CLASP and funders. And so the way I suppose our agenda, our objective is to provide insights and learning and opportunities to improve impact and accountability in the sector. And so we have a lot of sort of checks and balances in place, ethical research policies and all sorts of things that we adhere to. And just sort of at top level, obviously the data we get on personal identification information of customers is not our data. It comes from the companies, their customers, they're sharing with us. Any interview we conduct, we ensure that there is informed consent. We offer anonymity. And it's only at the end, when somebody knows what they've shared with us, we say, are you happy for us to include your name and information next to this information when we share it back to the company? And so there's opportunities to be anonymous, and we'll wipe that information out when we're sending back to companies if they say yes. So I think the way we use the data maybe looks slightly different. We're not trying to sell it. We're not using it for kind of our own gain, in fact, and we have all sorts of, secure server protection stuff. I'm also not an expert, but we have a team who know what they're doing, who sort all of that out. Interesting though, I did just see Liz write a message about, the enforcement and Gogla standards are meaningless. To some extent, I don't disagree. What's interesting is we're just talking with Gogla on their consumer protection work, which at the moment is self-assessed by companies. I myself also was have quite a strong voice to say I don't think we can really measure the success or performance of companies' consumer protection without ever talking to consumers. And so actually we're working with them right now to actually reach out to consumers and see what their understanding is of fair and transparent pricing, their protection of their own data, affordability and things like that. So I think it's new. I think people are still learning, and I think they're trying to get in before governments start putting in policies in place to say, you know, you need these protections in place. We've sort of flown under the radar. The financial inclusion space has that, but the energy space kind of fell into the financing because it was a way to increase affordability and uptake. So I think it's coming, but I agree, there's definitely more that needs to happen.
Yeah, and I think that both of what you say is right. The data is really important, and the anonymity is also important. This will help us understand more about behavior and who's using, and help us design programs. But as researchers or as companies, or we need to be, you know, we should be utilizing that data for good, and not, you know, it's our responsibility as well, I think, to also make sure that we keep privacy where important. We are really at the close. This has been a great panel. I think just touching the surface of the issue around RBF and how it is coming, I think, and it is becoming more important, along with carbon credits and carbon finance. I think all of that is going to play an important role. But what we see are that right now there are high transaction costs. There is a lack of you know, confidence in the market based on the old reporting structures or those types of things. We need to reduce the verification and the monitoring costs, and we also need more data to understand what is actually, you know, why people are making choices. And so some of that, you know, data beyond the meter data is also important. So many things that I think we learned today, and when the report comes out, I'm sure we'll you know, have a lot more insights. I will say, you know, from the Clean Cooking Alliance's side, this is something that we see as really coming from the system strategy is something really important going forward, is RBF, and we'll look to develop an accelerator that will lead on this learning and innovation agenda, and that will, you know, promote these clear and high quality standards for verification, because we do see this, just as others, as an area ripe for you know, growth, but also we need a lot of diligence in developing these systems. So really want to thank all of the panelists today for your insights, and thank MECS for the wonderful report. And I'm going to close it out, and yeah, everybody have a great afternoon or morning if you are where I am. So thank you. I don't know, Suzanne, if you want to say anything else.
Yes, very quickly.
Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much, Donnie, for your great support for the webinar, which is very much appreciated. Thanks to all the panelists and the audience for all your questions and participation. The recording of the webinar will be online. So, Joni already posted a link. We already posted a few links to relevant papers that might be interested. And we will update you on our report, which should be out very soon. So thank you again. And we keep on working on that important topic. Have a lovely afternoon and morning. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.